Hello, my name is Katreen Boustani. I'm a doctoral student at Indiana University, and I am here to present the work I did along with my colleagues N.C. Talley, Yura Kim, and Dr. Christena Nippert-Eng on player strategies for adapting to name constraints in online video games. First, I'm going to provide a brief summary of our research, then go into a little bit of the background on why we chose the research questions we did, highlight some of the literature that inspired our work, and then present briefly some of the findings that we had come across. Not all of them, though, because we don't have enough time to do that. Finally, I'm going to present some of the future directions that we would like to take this work. We conducted interviews with 29 online video game players to study the process of username creation. Our work lays out the constraints that these players commonly face when creating their usernames, as well as the strategies or workarounds they describe using in response to such constraints. In a broad sense, we're interested in the relationships between systems and those who engage with them. And rather than study these relationships as unidirectional, for example, the influence that one gaming system might have on a player, we wanted to understand the nuanced ways that systems and individuals come together to produce an outcome. We view a username, for the purpose of this research, as the outcome of a negotiation between a player and a gaming platform or system. Players negotiate with the video game system to satisfy their personal naming preferences, while also achieving and retaining access to their game of choice. Video game mechanisms for in-game identification are supported by a complex system of infrastructures and presented to players in the form of constraints on their username creation. Rather than creating entirely new, original infrastructures for every game, developers often utilize existing knowledge infrastructures and technologies. Because many online games rely on similar infrastructures, they also often implement similar player identification mechanisms to one another. This meant that we were able to study username creation across many different online games and platforms. We relied heavily on the work of Hagstrom, Crenshaw and Nardi, and Guiton, among others, for their in-depth exploration of video game character names. In our work, we focus on usernames rather than character names, but we still find that their findings apply quite well to usernames. And then to tackle this question of how this username co-construction occurs, we connect our findings to the work of Lampinen et al., who provide a framework of user strategies for self-presentation and boundary regulation on social networking sites. We find that this framework is particularly useful for mapping the strategies of username construction in online gaming. Now I'm going to present a few of our findings. So we found that players discussed four main types of constraints for their username creation: unique name requirements, character limitations, language filters, and content moderation. Participants recounted engaging in strategies to overcome these naming constraints, and these accounts led us to construct and enumerate a series of frequently practiced workarounds. We then mapped each workaround within the framework proposed by Lampinen et al. So players often tried to maintain the integrity of their preferred names by altering them so they were accepted by the system. We refer to names crafted in this way as a variation on an archetype. The archetype, in this case, is the originally desired name, and the variations are the names developed in response to the archetype's unavailability. Variations are distinct from the original, but similar enough that the link between the names is apparent. And in this case, this strategy would be considered corrective and behavioral within the Lampinen et al. Framework. Informed by previous encounters with filters and content moderation tools, many players chose to implement a workaround we describe as conflict avoidance. Gamers taking the strategy intentionally crafted their names to comply with a set of naming constraints that they expected a game system to enforce, regardless of whether the system actually did so. We would call this a preventative mental strategy within the Lampinen et al. Framework. Each participant appeared to maintain a collection of principles that guide their strategies across the various online spaces they inhabit. Over time, and through a continual process of encountering constraint and learning to negotiate with it, players appear to revise these principles. And such principles are shaped not only the workarounds that players employ, but also their attitudes towards workarounds and usernames. These two quotes about the use of automatic username generators show just how starkly some of the participants' views can contrast. Whereas participant 16 welcomed assistance from the Xbox Live username generator, participant 2 expresses disdain for these sorts of generated names. Participant 2's attitudes, in line with Crenshaw and Nardi's findings on character names, stem from his belief that a username is something deeply personal that can and should represent the identity of whoever plays under it. He believes that players who face name constraints should employ workarounds aimed at preserving this identity rather than giving it up by resorting to a randomly generated name. In the future, we would like to see more work on the prevalence of each type of workaround identified here, and on player preferences for different kinds of naming systems, especially given the user-centered design insights that might be gained by this kind of information. On this slide, you can also see two additional directions that we're taking our username research based on the rich findings we had from our interviews with participants. Thanks so much. I can take any questions you might have.